wonderful tense moment before we start. Right.
Yeah, no, that silenced us.
Yeah. Yeah. We are now live, so game face is on, everyone. Welcome everyone to our latest lunch hour, where we're going to talk about the UK EU summit and its outcome with two of the people best placed to discuss it. We have the EU's ambassador to the United Kingdom, Pedro Serrano, and the UK's ambassador to the EU, Lindsay Croisdale-Appleby. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for finding the time to do this. Just as ever, to our audience, stick your questions in Slido. I'm actually want to get through a lot of your questions today. I'm very interested what your questions are about, what you're focusing on. So get your questions in the Slido and vote for the ones you want me to pose to our panelists. Bear in mind, our panelists, neither of them are politicians. They're both diplomats. So if you have questions about the nature of our politics, I might just ignore them if it seems to me they're too political, but let's see where we get to. But anyway, just let's start with the sort of basics. Are you looking back on the summit now, are you both happy with how it went? Are there areas where you thought it under-delivered or areas where you thought it over-delivered? And should we start with Pedro? Should we start with you? I'll pick someone.
Okay. No, we see it as a very good outcome and very positive, and actually one in which both the European Union and the UK win. It is something that is going to bring more trade, is going to bring more investment, is going to bring more jobs, it's going to lower prices, it's going to bring more security, border security, energy security, and it's going to bring more defense. So all in all, I am and by the way, more people-to-people contact as well. So across the board, very, very ample agenda, many things that have been agreed to agree on a wide range of issues, and that will benefit directly both European Union and United Kingdom citizens.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it was particularly good that these outcomes are so broad. If you look across all the different areas, you have agreement to pursue an SPS agreement to pursue a rather different energy relationship to one that we've had before, a long section on irregular migration, lots of stuff on law enforcement and criminal justice. So I think the UK government wanted to look at all the areas where it thought cooperation could be stronger. And the EU also was prepared to look quite broadly at areas where it was in both sides' interest to strengthen the cooperation. So I think it sets a really good, broad agenda for the next few years, which will deliver all the kind of benefits that Pedro was talking about.
Would it be unfair to say it's broad but thin, in the sense that it covers an awful lot, but there's an awful lot still to be agreed?
But I wouldn't call that thin, Anand. You and I have had this conversation before. And I think there are quite a few things that need to be still agreed, but it would have been very difficult to agree all of that before, in the space of time we had to prepare for the summit. I think the summit provides a vision for the future of the relationship, and now it's about, and a roadmap for that future relationship, and now it's about implementing it. So I think it's quite dense, more than thin. I would call it dense, but of course, more work to be done in the coming weeks and months, and I think now implementation will be crucial. And I think a swift implementation on both sides is probably what is required.
Lindsay, would you go along with that?
I think it compares very well to anything that I see the EU agreeing with any other third country partner, for example. And in that sense, I think it's really far-reaching. I think that the substance in it reflects substantive agreement on policies, not just a commitment to pursue those policies. We had these quite detailed discussions about SPS, around emissions trading, and what things like that would really involve. So I'm confident that we can move to negotiations which it's already clear what the scope of those negotiations would be and how you get to a yes at the end of it. They aren't just areas that we're committed to sort of having a loose discussion about. They really reflect commitments, I think.
I concur fully with Lindsay. I think important parameters have already been agreed, and this will help advance the negotiation. That's what I call a vision in a way.
And it was interesting to hear you say, Lindsay, that you think this goes beyond what the EU has with other third countries, because one of my thoughts when reading the Security and Defence Partnership was it read quite a lot like the one with Norway.
Yeah. So when I say beyond other third countries, I think the relationship between the EU and Norway and the EEA members, for example, is uniquely deep and goes beyond any sort of normal third country relationship. And because of the kind of positions of both sides, but particularly the position of the UK government, we weren't looking for that kind of relationship. So I think if you're comparing it to the Swiss relationship or you're comparing it to the Norwegian relationship, they're genuinely very different in kind. If you compare it to sort of, for example, what the EU might be discussing with Canada in a few months' time, I think that this will look very deep and substantive, and actually very different in some areas to what the EU is doing with anyone else, or in the kind of third country category. So I think that makes it genuinely unique. And I think when you look at the areas that we're cooperating, it is unique. And of course, that uniqueness reflects the bonds. In terms of the SDP, I mean, what's written in the SDP is quite standard, but the cooperation that it will enable is anything but standard. Right. Because if you look at what we've done on Ukraine, on a whole range of areas, the delegation in London's played a critical role in taking all of this forward. You know, our foreign policy relationship since we left the EU is unique and is being carried forward in a range of very deep areas. What the SDP does is it makes clear that there's a whole series of additional areas where we should intensify and formalize that kind of cooperation. So whether that's the Western Balkans, whether it's hybrid, a lot of areas where, of course, the EU will do some things with third countries, and therefore you don't necessarily need a different formal framework. But the cooperation that will actually exist underneath it, you know, if you take an area like disinformation on Moldova, what the UK and the EU will do together on that will probably be very different and much more intense than the kind of foreign policy cooperation we have with other areas of the world.
Okay, well, I mean, we'll come back to some of this in more detail as we go, but do you think, both of you, it would be fair to say that we've finally broken free of Michel Barnier's staircase of doom? That in a sense we've come up with something that isn't very clearly flagged on that diagram, but is something a little bit sort of unique, a little bit, dare I say it, bespoke in a way that perhaps wasn't possible up to now in the Brexit talks? I suppose, Pedro, this is one for you really, because
I wouldn't, you know, compare it to past moments. I think we are building definitely on the very important agreements that we had passed, that we had after Brexit. So all this builds on the trading cooperation agreement, on the withdrawal agreement, on the winter framework. It builds beyond. What is very important, and I think Lindsay was referring to this, we are all in Europe. We share an economic space, a human space, a security and defense space. So that's what makes this relationship so unique. For the European Union, the security and prosperity and democracy in Europe is a priority, as it is for the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom is a key partner. We call it even now a strategic partner. We've established a strategic partnership, an essential ally in bringing those elements to Europe. And for the UK, if it's looking for its prosperity, its security, its defense, it cannot look, it has to look into Europe first and foremost. We are the immediate neighbors. 46-47% of UK trade is with the European Union. We share a common interest in protecting and supporting Ukraine and bringing back peace and security to Europe. We share similar problems in terms of irregular migration, and definitely our economies are very tied. So all this and what we have done now in this summit is that a clear acknowledgement of this bonds and a number of measures with clear parameters that will help us make the best of it and build it further. So I think it's a substantial step forward, while, of course, building very clearly on Brexit agreements.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of questions here coming in about the future. So the most popular one is, are you in a position to set out what the next concrete steps are? I mean, there's a lot of aspirations in what was agreed to go ahead and negotiate stuff. Do we have anything approaching timelines for any of those negotiations as yet?
So I would say I'm not sure timelines is the most useful way of looking at it, because I think both sides want to move swiftly and genuinely swiftly. I think that there are some procedural steps on some issues that will be necessary, particularly at the EU level, because of the way the EU institutions work. So there are some areas where the EU will need to produce formal legal mandates to negotiate agreements. We're obviously keen that those come as soon as possible, but it will be important that they get produced. And those, I would expect that there will be mandates to take things forward in youth experience, on SPS, on the electricity relationship, on emissions trading, to give a few examples. But there will be lots of areas where we don't need that kind of mandate, for example. So there was a commitment to do something about steel, for example. That's a very urgent problem. There's a commitment, I think, which doesn't need the same kind of legal mandate around the SAFE programme or the SAFE initiative, which the Council is adopting, I think, today, and where we will need to find a quick way forward on SAFE, because the programme itself is sort of an emergency programme, or it's certainly a programme that's meant to move very quickly. And then if you look at some of the operational cooperation on justice and home affairs, I think we can just move ahead and do those kind of things. So I think one of the strengths of the agreement is that there is operational cooperation at many different levels. Some of that will require a sort of formal legal negotiation, but a lot of it is really about getting on and doing things that are of interest to both sides. So when you look through the common understanding, I think there's a whole range of things that can sort of be progressed tomorrow. And then there's some things that will take a bit more time, but I would expect that they won't, I don't think either side wants to hang around. We've agreed the substance of things and we've agreed the parameters of things, and we want to move as quickly as both sides' kind of institutional constraints allow.
Okay. Well, Pedro, if we can just dig into this for a moment with you, what are the next steps with SAFE? Assuming the council does sign it off, what happens then in terms of making good on the relationship with the United Kingdom? What does the EU need to do?
Well, there are a number of steps that have to be taken just internally by EU member states to have SAFE work. They have to present programs of work, I think, or plans. I can't remember what it's called exactly. And they have to ask for specific amounts of credit to be allotted to them. So there are things that have to be done by member states themselves first. And I think these will be the first steps. It does not preclude from initial discussions or to initiate discussions on potentially another agreement with the UK that would enhance the possibilities of the UK to participate in SAFE programs. It will already be with things as they are. The UK can already, and UK companies can already participate. With the SDP agreement, the UK could also contribute to joint procurement within SAFE. But SAFE itself has to start working, and I think Lindsay was referring to this. It has just been approved, indeed, today, but a number of steps have to be taken by member states to turn it into the operational instruments it will be. So we're there. As regards SAFE, that's what I can say.
Okay, interesting. And when it comes to, say, the SPS agreement, do you foresee any problems getting a mandate from the EU side? I mean, I suppose the question that haunts everyone watching what happened in its aftermath is how much of the prep for the negotiations to come has already been done. So how much of this is sort of ready to go, or how much is actually going to be quite tricky?
Well, the EU has experience on SPS agreements, so it will. I have no doubt that it will start working on it very swiftly. Again, I think swiftly is the word used by Lindsay that I'd like to recall. So yes, that's the main aim, that we can advance. And yes, this is nothing new. These kind of agreements, we have a lot on which to build and present relatively quickly, a mandate that needs to be approved by the council that would allow us to start engaging with negotiations.
Okay, and we've got a lot of questions in about the youth experience scheme. Just to be clear, the document that was produced by the EU around the time of our local elections last year that caused such a furore here, that was just a draft from the Commission to member states, wasn't it? That wasn't any kind of mandate.
That's correct.
Where does that lie now? What stage has that reached?
Well, we have to, based, I guess, on discussions that we've already had within the European Union, and once a formal mandate would have to be given to the EU for that negotiation. But we've already included in that in the common understanding some elements that have to conform the mandate that will be given by the European Union. So I think we will have to go into a mandate, and then on that basis engage with on real negotiations with the UK.
But it seems to me that both sides have sort of evinced quite a lot of trust in the other in this arrangement, because quite a lot of what was done at the summit, you got the sense that both sides were thinking to themselves, we'll do this, and then down the road we'll get this kind of in exchange. That both sides have invested a degree of faith in the process. Is that fair? That both sides sort of are relatively confident that the things they've said they will be able to agree on, they will?
I would agree with that. Yes, I think there a lot of trust has been generated with agreements on the big lines of what we want to achieve. So hopefully this will allow us to advance. And this is not only aspirational. You were saying what we aspire to. Actually, we have agreed to work towards having all these agreements, which means that we will do it. And what is in that common understanding are things that are going to be implemented. And that's what both sides have committed to.
Did you want to come in on that, Lindsay? Or
yeah, I mean, I think we start from the point of view that, you know, the EU is a good partner, and there's every reason to believe that both sides are going to continue to kind of take forward the initiatives we've discussed. And I think it is true there was a good spirit in the discussions that led up to the common understanding. And I think that we're confident that we agreed things that, as Pedro said, we can go ahead and implement. Otherwise, I don't think either side would have really wanted to put them at the center of a kind of summit between the two parties. And yeah, I mean, I think one of the strengths of the EU is that occasionally, I don't think it would be stretching anything to say, occasionally the EU takes a bit of time to decide whether things are a good idea, because it needs the internal support within the institutions of 27 member states. But once the EU decides that it wants to do something, in my experience, it's pretty sort of patient and determined about trying to do that.
just turning specifically for a moment to the question of Northern Ireland. I'm right in saying, aren't I, that if we get the agreement on participation in the internal energy market, the alignment of ETS and an SPS deal, those things would have a significant impact on easing the operation of the GBNI border, won't they?
Do you want me to start with that? Yes. I mean, I think that's. I think the thing that people will notice most is the SPS agreement, because what it will obviously do is be clear that goods that are moving between the UK and the EU don't need SPS checks, don't need export health certificates. It will be possible to move your pet without having a cumbersome process around that. A lot of costs will be reduced, and that, of course, if you can move anything without an SPS check between the GB and the EU. Obviously, you can also move it without a check between GB and Northern Ireland, given that the purpose of the framework in the Windsor framework is to ensure that there is that EU standards can be applied in Northern Ireland for the kind of relevant goods. So I think that an SPS agreement will have significant benefits for fluidity of trade across the island of Ireland and between the UK and the EU, and that will be of significant benefit to Northern Ireland. The electricity thing and ETS, I think, are more, there will be more in the background, but they'll be very, very significant for businesses and very significant for the shared determination to sort of reduce energy prices and make meeting our clean climate goals efficient in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, in GB, but also in Denmark or the Netherlands, or indeed across the whole of the EU. And so I think there'll be a significant lessening of frictions. I think it will probably be more noticeable to business and in the background, whereas I think the things that happen around SPS, they're obviously very consumer-facing goods and very important to people, that they can, obtain British sausages in Siena, for example. I think was one of the examples given, and that British produce that hasn't been easily available in the EU and vice versa will now become available in the EU and the UK. And I think that will be a huge, as you saw, a very strong welcome from food retailers, because they really think this will make a difference to the way their operations work, and therefore the kind of price and quality of food they can provide consistently throughout the year across the UK and the EU.
Okay. I mean, actually, that very practical dimension is something I want to touch on. I mean, one of the things that has struck me post-summit on social media is the speed with which Nick Thomas Simmons got down to Marks and Spencer to talk about what the practical impact of this deal would be. And that, I mean, for me as a political scientist, that really interests me, because of course we have a political backdrop to all of this in the United Kingdom, and it seems to me that one of the government's strategies around this summit is to emphasize the practical day-to-day impact on food prices, on availability, cost of living, and things like that. Are you confident that that's something you'll be able to sell to the public? Because I mean, Brexit has, one thing that Brexit has done, it seems to me, over the last 10 years, it's sort of constantly surprised us about the economic lessons the public will and won't learn from it, and the assumptions that the public made. And it's sometimes quite hard to prove that X decision with the European Union led to Y outcome on your supermarket shelves. Was that a key part of the sort of governmental strategy on our side, Lindsay, to try and press home the practicalities?
Well, I think what this government has been saying since it was elected is that it wasn't really very interested in theory about the relationship between the EU and the UK. It was interested in building a practical relationship which delivered benefits. So it wasn't going to have a sort of ideological debate one way or the other about the customs union or free movement or the single market. Instead, it was going to focus on things that would actually make a difference to the cost of living, would actually make a difference to the ease of people being able to travel and take their pets on holiday, these kind of things. And from my perspective, yes, I think that will cut through, because I think British people, some of them are interested in a kind of political debate, but most people are interested in everyday things that are important to them. And so I think it was very conscious that the government wanted to be clear that what motivated it in the relationship with the EU was things that made a difference to people in the UK, and by extension, things that made a difference to people in the EU, because we always wanted it to be a win-win positive relationship and positive set of improvements for both sides. Some of that's a bit more obvious than other bits, such as passports, but some things like a lot of the JHA cooperation, the fact that in fact you can pursue police enforcement and cooperation in a smoother way around use of electronic evidence and these kind of things, that really delivers benefits for people. Often they're not, those aren't front of mind for people, but our focus all the way through has been very practical in that sense. And I think that is a sort of better discussion to have in some ways than whether you want a stronger relationship with the EU just because you want one or you don't want one. I think British people are quite have often been quite empirical and practical. We sort of pride ourselves on that. And I think that's what, over time, will interest people in the relationship.
And I presume it's a slightly different debate on the EU side, isn't it, Pedro? Because the gains to be had for each individual member state are less significant than for the United Kingdom. But has there been the same emphasis on the EU side on the sort of practical merits of cooperation?
I think I mean, there are obvious advantages also on the EU side in all these areas. So, but I think the fact that we also create a more favorable environment for the UK, which we hope that these agreements will bring, is also in the interest of the EU per se. We want a strong UK. We want a strong UK that is working for a stronger Europe. So the fact that economy is working well in the UK, that we have greater security, by the way, on security, again, very reciprocal advantages, because we will also get additional information. We have to protect our common, in the EU, our common borders, but actually we have to help protect the borders of Europe, and the UK does its part as well in that. So and on defense, of course, we have a common interest. Which, by the way, also in the framework of NATO and our cooperation within NATO, and to create, as it has been said these last days, quite a lot, is a stronger European pillar within NATO, on which the EU has a lot that it can contribute to. So all these areas are areas that are mutually beneficial.
Okay. Sorry, go on.
No, they're mutually beneficial, and we're happy to see that it will benefit the UK population, as it will benefit as well EU citizens.
Okay, I want to come back to the security in a bit more detail later on. I mean, one interesting question that's come in from Anonymous. There's a lot of Anonymous. I always assume Anonymous are civil servants, but maybe that's just on my part. To what extent are the coming negotiations a package? That is to say, is everything, is stuff being negotiated individually, or to what extent will things end up being linked? I mean, we're thinking, for instance, most obviously, an SPS agreement, which the UK government very badly wants, and the youth mobility, which clearly some people on the EU side very badly want. Will they be tied up as a package in any way, shape, or form, or can they be autonomous negotiations?
Do you want me to start with that? I mean, I think it's probably in the interest of both sides that the package remains kind of balanced and positive. And there are sort of different levels of interest in different aspects of the agreement. That's the nature of this kind of discussion. But to go back to your earlier point, I think it was all conducted in a very good spirit. So I don't think it's a matter of making one thing sort of conditional on another, because I think that would take us back to a bit of sort of transactionalism. But I think it's about a genuine commitment on both sides to progress all the things in the agreement and all the things in the terms that we've set out in the agreement. I think that will mean that in future summits, one of the reasons why I think a summit process is a good political context for some of this is it will allow both sides to take stock of where progress has been made and where more progress needs to be taken forward. So I think both sides will want to have a degree of confidence that everything that we've agreed we are taking forward. And I think that will be a dynamic that's sort of more positive than seeing it as sort of very hard linkages. But I do think obviously it would be a challenge for both sides if a very significant element wasn't progressed, for example. That would cause a challenge or a problem, because what we were trying to put together was a balanced agreement of the kind that both sides would see shared value in going forward.
Pedro?
I think Lindsay has presented this exceptionally brilliantly well.
I remember the first time we did one of these events, I think it was you and Zhao a few years ago, Lindsay, if you remember, and everyone saying, remarkable event. They agreed about everything. This is a real turning point in the Brexit process. So you're maintaining that tradition, both of you. So congratulations. Got a question from Simon Usherwood, which is, to what extent is the list of topics for negotiation closed? That is to say, is there scope to add things to this ongoing process before another summit and say, actually, we want to widen our cooperation in this area as well? Is that conceivable? Do we have to wait for summits to set those sorts of agendas?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things going on there. One of the things we've committed to in the joint statement, I think, rather than the common understanding, is to sort of promote the high-level exchanges and to promote exchanges at every level. Because one thing I think we can all be fairly confident about is quite a lot will change in the world before the next summit. And there are a whole range of areas, whether that's about aspects of economic security, or you could have a dramatic change in some way in counter-terrorism, or, you know, a lot of things could happen in the world, and a lot of things could impact on the kind of cooperation that we want to do. So I think that it isn't a closed set of cooperation that the EU and the UK are going to take forward. If you look at the joint statement, for example, there's masses of commitment to multilateralism and what we do together in those kind of areas. We'll be working in the WTO together this year in the same way as we did last year. So I think there's both a live agenda and there are this sort of concrete set of specific initiatives which we are both sides absolutely committed to taking forward.
Okay. Do you want to
Once again, I can only mark my agreement with what Lindsay has said. It's a live relationship. So it's not fixed only in a piece of paper. It's definitely the piece of paper is not a piece of paper. It's a very serious agreement. And it sets out a number of things that we want to do. But it doesn't preclude us from identifying other objectives while we're working towards this implementation and in view of all the different contacts that will be taking place at different levels, that we can find other things. Of course, we will continue also using and implementing through the mechanisms that have been agreed in the Trading Cooperation Agreement, the withdrawal agreement. But there are many other contacts that are taking place, and as Lindsay says, and things that we have to implement in the field of security, for example, and home affairs and justice, that may open also other areas where we think that cooperation can be mutually beneficial. So we're not going to say no to anything that is mutually beneficial. I think if we discover things that need to be done, we will move on those as well.
Okay. There's a very specific question here. I don't know whether this is true or not. It says that in the Q&A document that accompanied the various papers from the summit, it says that the Commission and the UK have committed to take the steps to formalise political agreement within a month. What precisely does that mean? Formalise political agreement within a month? Do you know, or is that?
What is that? Sorry, Anna?
Apparently, another anonymous person says in the Q&A document that was appended to the summit, the two sides have committed to take the steps to formalise political agreement within a month. Is that a phrase you recognise? We can move on if not. That's an awfully unfair question to ask you about a single sentence from all those papers.
I'm not aware of this. Maybe Lindsay has more insight.
I mean, I think there are definitely things that we'll be doing in the next month, and there will be some formalization of some of the decisions within a month. But I don't know which one specifically that's referring to. As I said, JHA or law enforcement is a good area where good example of an area where some specific things will just be taken forward now as a matter of course. So I think that is, there's probably a range of areas where that's true, but obviously the bigger, longer term agreements that will take more time. So you know, I don't think that should be interpreted as everything that is in that document will be turned into sort of legal agreements in a month, because I don't think that will happen.
There are quite a few people after a bit more sort of specificity. I don't know if that's possible or not. You know, quite a few people are saying, can you give a ballpark for how long it might take for the Commission to get a mandate to start SPS negotiations? Is that just a movable feast, Pedro, or do we have any idea?
I really don't know how long it may take, but it shouldn't. I mean, in principle, it's something that we have done in the past. That is no big mysteries on it. I hope it will move swiftly. I cannot say whether it will be within a month or 2 months, but it will be. I hope it will move quite swiftly.
Okay, and just another one for you, Pedro, from John Pete. I like this one.
What's John asking?
He's saying it doesn't. I mean, basically, he's saying, doesn't this whole thing give the lie to the idea that we don't like cherry picking? Isn't the truth that the EU is perfectly happy to accept cherry picking, SPS energy, electricity, whatever, as long as they gain something from it too?
You know, this This is not about cherry picking or not cherry picking. We have identified a number of issues that are of mutual interest. We have a solid set of agreements that run the relationship. In addition to that, we find that there is advantage in advancing on a number of issues that have been identified in the customs union. No customs union that have been identified in the common understanding. It's the CU acronym that threw me off. The common understanding.
Too late. We've already clipped that bit now.
So on the common understanding paper that are mutual interest, and we will just move on this. I think we are beyond, and I think it'd be good if we started moving beyond rhetorics that are no longer helpful, and that we look at the relationship as a living relationship, as all of them are, the relationship of the European Union with any country in the world, but this is with a country with whom we share deep interests, and we're looking at it from that perspective of a country with whom we share interests and how to progress that relationship to the mutual benefit of both sides.
Is living relationship just a polite way of saying endless negotiations forever?
No, it's a way of saying that's life, you know. And life, we will have an agreement on what we have agreed to agree now, and according to the parameters that have been set in the common understanding, in the joint statement, and in the SDP agreement, Security and Defense Partnership. So we will implement those. But okay, we're not saying that this is the end of the line. But again, this will be for our decision makers to decide. I'm no one to say whether this is the end of the line or not. This will be decided by the Council in the case of the European Union. But we have a living relationship. There are contacts that will allow to identify what needs to be done. This will be taken to the necessary decision-making instances, and we will advance. But as we do with other states, I don't know why it should be different in the case of the United Kingdom.
I suppose what I would add to that, if it's useful, is just I think what's very encouraging about this whole process is I think the European Union has shown a lot of enthusiasm to discuss new areas of cooperation with the EU with the UK over the last year. And I think that there are lots of areas where cooperation is sort of directly relevant because of how close together we are. So, for example, lots of people say that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is a sort of very bare bones agreement, but it includes very deep provisions on social security coordination, for example. I think there are lots of bits of the world where the EU, wouldn't have a big interest in doing a social security coordination agreement. And I think that the areas that we've highlighted and picked together this time reflect where there is a sort of deep area of common interest. And I think there was a reasonable degree of kind of understanding from the beginning of the process that the discussion was not about rejoining the customs union or rejoining the single market or restarting freedom of movement. And I think that enabled these discussions to be taken forward in a way that sort of didn't really engage those questions of sort of cherry picking and trying to create a very different relationship with the single market. So I think interpreted positively, I think we will continue to find areas where even if you're outside the single market and the customs union, you can have a very positive and mutually beneficial UK-EU relationship. And I think as we go along, we sort of discover more of those areas rather than less, which is good.
I mean, you might well be right, but it strikes me that we haven't actually had that argument about the youth exchange scheme or the youth experience scheme as yet, have we? Because, that has to be negotiated, and it'll be interesting to see what the political debate around that looks like. I mean, it clearly, obviously, unambiguously isn't freedom of movement, but that's not going to stop people from saying it is. So I think, in a sense, we've yet to find out what the politics of that looks like, aren't we?
Well, I thought youth experience might come up in this meeting at some point or another. I mean, I think what we agreed with the EU on youth experience was that it was a time-limited scheme on terms to be mutually agreed, and the overall number of participants must be acceptable to both sides. And so I think that does define what kind of scheme that we're talking about. And we've done lots of work to understand that that scheme would be similar to the kind of youth experience schemes that we have in other parts of the world. I think there will be some some discussions around youth experience in the same way as there will be some discussions around electricity, which is a kind of new and different area of cooperation, which is deeper probably than anything that's been done before. But I think those discussions will be pretty positive, and I don't think they call into question the sort of key parameters of the relationship from our perspective. So I think it would be possible to have a very positive discussion about that, and I think people in the UK and the EU will both understand what we're trying to change with the youth experience scheme and also what we're not trying to change.
I think, if I may, on this, what we talk is about a balanced scheme, I think. And the UK has 13, if I'm not wrong, different schemes with other countries. It would be very surprising that it would not have a scheme with its most immediate neighbors. It has even schemes with very populous countries. So I think all this falls into a practice, actually, that exists in definitely within the United Kingdom. I think it's important to see as well that societies will remain together if you encourage them to be together. And it is important to promote contacts also at youth level, so that young people get to know each other, get to know the different cultures, make friends, and ensure that this community of culture remains very active and alive. It's also important to take note in the last figures that were released, I think, last week by the UK on migration. We saw that there's a continuous trend of emigration of EU residents from the UK. We're losing in the UK close to 100,000 European Union citizens that are leaving every year. So we just have to note that trend and bear in mind that it is important to keep these contacts strong and alive if we want to keep our communities together. And I think that's what hopefully we will reach through a scheme of this type, which will not only favor Europeans, it will favor many young Britons that are very keen to go to the continent, which is just across the door. They don't have to take very expensive planes and fly across the world. They can just take a ferry or take a train and visit Europe, work a bit if they want to, make friends, come back, and keep that relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union and member states of the European Union as close as possible, because it is in our mutual interest.
Okay. There's one thing that occurs to me. I mean, prior to the announcement of the summit and probably to the election of this government, a lot of attention was focused on the upcoming review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which I think is due to happen in 26, if I'm not mistaken. Does this process that we've launched at the summit now basically confirm that review will be a purely technical thing to review the functioning, and that the actual the sort of macro element of the relationship, the politics of the relationship is handled via this track that has been started at the summit? I hope that makes sense. Is that how you see it?
Well, in my view, at least, the implementation is a serious exercise, and it will have to be carried out as such. It is the machinery and the essence of the relationship that has to be put on the table and seen how it has worked, how we have been implementing these agreements, which have proved, I think, their value. The agreements themselves have been very effective and are being implemented very effectively. But are there things and elements where we can make further progress, or things that we have to adapt? And I think that this is an exercise that we have not entered deeply into yet, precisely because the other more political and widening of the relationship was on the table. But we will no doubt have to engage in this exercise with equal interest as we move on the implementation, of course, of all the agreements that we have reached in the last summit.
Lindsay, did you want to come in on this or not?
No, I mean, I think that's right. There's a lot that goes on the relationship. There are a whole load of specialized committees and joint committees, and the review, I think, will look at the operation of some of that. But, I think inevitably a summit process will be the most important political process between the two sides, because it's leader-led. And I think both sides wanted summits for precisely that reason. So I think it was always bound to be the case that sort of big decisions would be made in the context of summits, not in the context of a sort of technical review.
Yeah. Okay. Just coming back to the security and defence partnership. I mean, one of the things that has most struck me about the UK-EU relationship post-Brexit was just how close it was on matters of foreign and security policy without any kind of formal security arrangement in place. Now, leaving aside the stuff to do with SAFE, just in terms of the sort of processes that are going to be initiated by the SDP, what practical difference do you think this whole raft of new forums and meetings that are envisaged, how big a difference do you think that will make, given the fact that our cooperation has been pretty good without them till now?
If I may, in my view, it will just confirm a normalization of the relationship and avoid any hesitations in getting together and meeting and discussing different issues. There are a number of themes that have been identified, but I think it's the Foreign Secretary and the High Representative will be meeting at least twice a year. Probably they informally, bilaterally twice a year, because they are de facto they are meeting everywhere in G7, NATO, and many other fora apart from their own bilateral meetings. But this will no doubt give a further push to those consultations, that cooperation in international fora throughout the world, in our embassies and delegations throughout the world. So this is a very strong encouragement for this to advance. We have to recall that at the end, this is part of what the EU had proposed to the UK in 2019 through the political declaration. And that political declaration had not been accepted at the time by the United Kingdom. So inevitably that creates a bit of, or created at the time, a bit of more hesitation to pursue these type of contacts. Now, of course, life is what it is, as I said before, and the practicality of things and the need to work together has predominated. But with what has been agreed now, I think any hesitations, any potential hurdles have been removed, and the cooperation will proceed in a much more natural and swift manner.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I think in a way, I think it's right to say as well that the Ukraine crisis has delivered has been quite a motivating factor. Mm-hmm. And I think the more kind of thoughtful observers on the EU side would say that for the EU to cooperate with third countries, some of these institutional structures are quite important in terms of delivering sustained cooperation and sustained support in the Council for that kind of engagement on themes that are kind of a little bit less prominent than two or three of the main themes that have sort of dominated the international agenda over the last year. And I think it's that kind of, there's a depth to the cooperation that will be embedded. And there's also a stronger sense that all of these things are legitimate and important things to discuss between the two sides.
I suppose one of the things that the two sides have to figure out together is, in the event of either Europeans having to do a lot more to guarantee their own security, or Europeans being called upon to guarantee some kind of peace in Ukraine, we're still not absolutely certain what the institutional format for that would be, are we? I mean, it's one of the reasons why we see all these meetings of the so-called coalition of the willing is, are we any nearer to settling on the right institutional form to take that sort of collaboration forward?
Well, all I think I would say about that from a UK perspective is the joint statement sets out a lot of areas of cooperation. The SDP will obviously have a particular role, but not an exclusive role, for the External Action Service. The cooperation between the leaders will be important. And the cooperation between the UK and the Commission is set out in the Common Understanding and includes, for example, reference to SAFE, where obviously it's building on the rearm initiative put forward by the Commission President. So I think one of the reasons why having this kind of broad framework for this cooperation is it does sort of make clear which bit of the EU institutions we will be engaging with in some of the different areas where the competences are shared. So I think that's useful for a third country like us, because it helps us navigate and get those sort of choices right about what the correct entry point is to the European Union. I don't think there's a world in which lots of formats won't continue to exist on foreign policy topics. They have sort of throughout my working life, really. The kind of coordination that we used around the Arab Spring was a bit different to the coordination that we've used around Ukraine. And I think what you do is you find the relevant parties with the relevant kind of competencies to take things forward. What I can tell you is that from a UK point of view, we've been very grateful for the work on the coalition of the willing that we've done, not only with the member states involved, but also with the European institutions that have been involved. And they played a very valuable role in all of those discussions, in the same way that the cooperation with other European institutions in Europe, such as NATO and such as the OSCE, has also been important. So, I mean, we're very grateful that these forums and formats that we're setting up, the European institutions have had a very positive role to play in all of them from our perspective.
No, thank you. I agree with Lindsay. I think on Ukraine, we still have to see how the peace how it will return to peace, what kind of agreement we will have to implement, ceasefire agreement and other agreements that may need to be implemented, and then determine exactly how is it that we're all going to contribute to this. Definitely the coalition of the willing has been a good, I think, instrument to start bringing countries around a potential military support. There may be other means and instruments that we need to deploy as we have a clearer view of what needs to be done. And we have to be flexible and open to this. We are very positive about our cooperation with the UK. The UK has been, with the European Union, leading in the response to the attack and the aggression by Russia to Ukraine, and therefore our cooperation on this will remain a very strong one. But again, in terms of formats and what needs to be done, I think we still have to see precisely what needs to be done, and that is still not clear at this point.
I mean, of course, one of the things that's still stymieing British participation in the military mobility program under PESCO is the ongoing disagreement about Gibraltar. Do either of you have any sense about where we are on that and whether a solution is? I mean, a solution's been quite close for a while, from what I understand. But is there any way you can update us on that situation now, or would you rather not?
Should I start with that, Pedro? You're
Sure.
welcome to. So for those of you who were following the summit press conference, I recognize not everyone will have been. What the European Council President said is he thought that we were very close to agreement on that. And I think that's right. I think that we have been working very hard for a number of years on what is quite a complicated and important negotiation on Gibraltar. And I think from the UK point of view, we will continue to work to try and bring that to a conclusion as quickly as possible. And we are very confident that there is a kind of positive outcome that could be possible to that negotiation. And we've worked very constructively with our European Union partners on that. So I don't think there's any lack of willing to progress it on either side. And I think it is indeed the case that finding an agreement on Gibraltar will ensure that that can be a positive part of the post-EU exit story for the UK and the EU as well. And that's what I think everyone involved in it is determined to find a way to make sure becomes true.
I concur with Lindsay, and the good work is being done by all sides in order to reach an agreement. It will be an agreement that will benefit everybody as well. And I think we've been, Lindsay quoted the President of the European Council, so I can just refer to that. Yes, we hope that we're very close, and that will clarify a lot of things, including on military mobility related participation of the military mobility PESCO project.
Okay, thank you very much. Question from David Finnemore. What would be the consequences of either side not delivering on the joint commitment to the full, timely and faithful implementation of the withdrawal agreement, trade and cooperation agreement? I mean, how will that ongoing story of implementation impact on what we are agreeing and trying to do now?
If I may, we have mechanisms to ensure the implementation. And I think both sides, by the way, my view from here in London, but Lindsay, you would tell me, is that both sides are actually implementing very well their obligations under the TCA and the withdrawal agreement. And if there are misunderstandings or if there are different ways of understanding, we have mechanisms to address them. And they are effective mechanisms we've seen also in the past. So I don't think that we have to start speculating with hypotheses where we're going to enter into major difficulties in this implementation. Again, both agreements and the Windsor framework as well are being implemented effectively. We're consulting on a daily basis almost on the implementation of these agreements. And if there are difficulties, we have mechanisms also to address those difficulties. So I don't think we have to speculate, and I don't see the interest of speculating into cases where there would be a major breakup or flaw in the implementation of any of these agreements.
Excellent, thank you. Apparently, I have to apologise for drinking French water. I'm very sorry to be drinking French water. Whoever thought that was a major issue in this.
I don't think you should apologise. I think it's good you're drinking French water. It's quite tasty.
Very cosmopolitan, me. We're running out. We're getting towards the end. There's one question which is for you, Pedro, particularly, which is on the EU side. I mean, clearly, our politics in the UK is what it is. But was there any concern on the EU side by signing up to something that is really quite an ambitious set of agreements or potential agreements? This is something that a new government might come in and reverse. I mean, to what extent does the politics of the United Kingdom play into your thinking on the EU side? I mean, the leader of the opposition said very clearly, if there's stuff we don't like, we're going to unpick it as soon as we come into government. Does that play into your thinking?
I think this would be a question more to Lindsay than to myself. But what I can tell you is for us, it's very easy. We negotiate and we engage with governments and with the government that is in place in every country. If we didn't do that, we would not be able to operate. And we are engaging with the government that has a very wide majority that is here to stay still for at least the next general election in 2029. And that's what we're doing. We're engaging with the government of the United Kingdom and reaching agreements with the government of the United Kingdom, as we should.
Lindsay?
I mean, I think the key to that is, are we confident that these agreements will deliver demonstrable benefits to the UK, standard of living in the UK? Will they be supported in the UK going forward? And the government has identified areas of collaboration that is very confident it believes are in the national interest, and will continue to make the case that will deliver benefits for British people. And I think this comes back to the question about, what is the British public really after in its relationship with the European Union? And I think the government's confident that if you build a win-win positive relationship with the European Union, that will be sustainable over time.
I mean, just on that, and I know you said you're not a massive fan of sort of timelines or milestones, but in a year's time, what would you like to be seeing as a result of what we've got now? Where would the sort of practical impacts be? What stage would we have reached? Will everything have been signed and sealed and done that we've said in this year's summit? I mean, where would you like to see us in the run up to next year's summit?
Well, I don't know if you want to go ahead, Lindsay, or I'm happy to.
Go for it, Pedro.
Okay. I think we have a very important program ahead of us, and hopefully we will have an agreement on SPS. We will have another agreement on implementation of SAFE. We will have been implementing. We will have an agreement on the youth experience scheme. We will have implemented a number of decisions on further cooperation on justice and home affairs. We will be hopefully as well. Why not? We will be advancing on electricity and have clear vision of how our relationship in that field is going to advance. So I do think that in the next year leaders on both sides will look forward to seeing most of what has, if not all, most of what has been agreed implemented. And I think it's not too unrealistic to think it is possible to achieve it. And definitely that's a good thing about having these summits. They are there to review implementation and to provide new impetus to the relationship. I think this is what they have agreed to do. And this is what will happen in a year's time in Brussels, probably, when our leaders meet. And my hope and expectation is that they will have a lot of positive results to comment on, and hopefully as well that they will start delivering practical results to UK and EU citizens alike. And as Lindsay was saying, some of the issues implementation will be certainly easy and may be very, very early. Others, lengthier negotiations, will take a bit more time, but we have 1 year, and I think within that year, hopefully we will have made considerable progress.
I think I'd just add that at times we've achieved a lot in quite short periods with between the UK and the EU. And I think both of the leaders most involved are absolutely determined to make this a success. And I think, if I may say, I don't think President von der Leyen lacks for determination and tenacity about achieving the things that she's asked the Commission services to achieve. I think the same is true of the Council President, who made a very early visit to the UK and is very committed to the relationship. And I think the same is true on the UK side. So you can make really quick progress. And I think what is important is that we've set some very solid bases for the negotiations that will come, including in some of the complicated areas. So we're certainly not starting from scratch.
Brilliant. Okay, on that note, I'm afraid we've run out of time. So thank you, both of you, so much for taking the time to do this. I'm going to be unexpectedly organised and uncharacteristically organised and just flag up a couple of events we've got coming up. On the 4th of June at 7 p.m, we have an In Conversation with Sir Lawrence Freedman, where we'll be talking a lot, no doubt, about Ukraine and current security crises. On the 10th of June, for our next lunch hour, we are talking about immigration with a panel including Rob Ford, Jonathan Portes and Madeline Sumption. So sign up for those if you haven't already. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you so much to our two speakers. That was really, really interesting. Congratulations on all your hard work leading up to the summit, and hope to see you all soon. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you, Anand. Bye-bye. Thank you, Lindsay.